Happy New Year's Eve again, Kingswood. So, when I get to this point in the year, I always find myself sort of beginning to consider the last year and what happened. But I also often find myself considering the years prior. And I found myself afresh this year, kind of stopping and thinking to myself, boy, where I'm at now in my life, I would have never imagined it 2 or 3 years ago. And that sort of catches me off guard and sort of takes my breath away even when I think about it, because I think sometimes the way that I had planned and pictured my life and ordered my life, maybe I thought that one time that was the best way. That was the way. But oftentimes, what does life do? Life can often throw us these unexpected turn-ins, these unexpected events, things that we don't plan for, and we're constantly having to recalibrate and readjust. And some of you probably know and have heard that sound on your GPS this week as you miss a turn and you're headed to your family's house, right? Recalculating the route. And for me, I feel like that happens every year. I step back and I look and I think, boy, I found myself recalculating the route. You know, from the very beginning of my life, I was sort of an unexpected turn. My parents married when they were 20, and my mom then gave birth to me when I was 21, and they were high school sweethearts. And the surprising thing about all of it was that I was a honeymoon baby. So I was made the wedding night. And I can tell you right now, that was not in the plan. That was not in the cards to have me right away that night. But they adjusted, didn't they? They planned accordingly. And in the same way, I could think about Mary and Joseph. And Mary and Joseph surely had plans. They were engaged to be married. And then all of a sudden, an angel appears to Mary. Not Mary and Joseph together. I think that's ironic and interesting. Just Mary. And tells Mary that she will bear the Christ child. And then so Mary has to go and take this news to Joseph. And when she takes the news to Joseph, what is Joseph's response? He's angry. He's full of fear. He's hurt. He's disappointed. Why? Because they had plans. They were engaged, which meant they had not yet consummated their marriage, which meant that he felt like he could no longer trust Mary because this baby must not have been his. Joseph feels like his whole life, the plans that he had all of a sudden are greatly altered. But Joseph, being a kind and righteous man, the Bible says, he decided to not publicly shame her. He had every right in that culture as a man to publicly shame her, in that he would leave her and bring her before the town square, break off the engagement, and he could have even had her stoned if he wanted. Yet Joseph doesn't do that. Joseph decides that he is just going to leave her quietly, break off the engagement. But that night, Joseph goes to sleep, and an angel comes to him in his sleep, in a dream, not while he's awake, and tells Joseph, Joseph, I know that this news was hard. I know that you are afraid of what this means for your life. But Mary is not lying. Mary was not unfaithful. Mary has the Christ child, and you two shall raise him together. You should take Mary as your wife. Now, when Joseph wakes up, he has options. God's given us free will. God's given us the capacity to make choices, and God does not in any way use us as a puppet, or God does not in any way make us do anything. We are given those choices. And so when Joseph wakes up, he's got a choice here. He could either blame it on bad pizza or falafel the night before and just say, boy, that was a weird dream. I don't know, that was whacked out. Or he could also say, God, I feel like you're asking a little bit too much of me here. God, what did I do to deserve this? Why me? What are the people going to say? How will I be shamed as well now? Well, how will our family respond? And this isn't how I had hoped for things to plan and to turn out. I don't know, God. I think I'm just going to let Mary do her thing. And he could have just chosen not to marry Mary. But Joseph doesn't do that. The Bible tells us that Joseph takes this word from God and he says, God, I trust that your plans for my life are better than mine. And so I'm going to lay down my plans, my agenda, and I'm going to embrace your plans for my life. And he marries Mary. How many of you maybe in some way could identify with that story? How many of you have some things in your life where maybe you thought you'd be married by now and you're not? Or maybe you got married and the marriage has not been at all what you thought it would be or was going to be. Maybe you have adult children and they have made choices and turned out and done things that maybe just were not what you had envisioned in your mind, and you're having to grieve that reality. Maybe you had hoped to have kids, or you'd hoped it was easier to have kids, and that hasn't been possible for you, or was more work than you had anticipated. Maybe you've lost a child, and that sticks with you. Maybe you've lost a job, or lost money when the stock market crashed and retirement didn't come as soon as you had hoped for it. Maybe you came down with an illness or lost a loved one. Whatever it is, you name it. You know what it is more than I do. What was that unexpected turn? What was that moment when all of a sudden it was like, this is not the way that I had planned. This is not how I had anticipated it. And you had to regroup and say, God, help me to trust you. That your ways are higher than my ways, that you have good plans for me, that you're going to work this out, that I'm going to get through this, that I'm going to be okay. You know, when I think about Joseph and Mary, I think about, they had it really hard. I mean, you'd think bringing the Christ child into the world that you'd have this like incredible favor and that this bubble would be around you and that no pain or sorrow or problems would come your way. But as Pastor James talked about on Christmas Eve, it was not a silent night and it was not easy. It was hard, and it was painful, and it was difficult. And Mary and Joseph's lives did not get much easier. We know that Joseph, we see him at 12. We see him show up at Jesus' life at 12 years old in the temple. But then we don't hear much of Jesus' teenage years at all. And then all of a sudden we sort of pick up again when Jesus is 30 and does his first miracle and begins his earthly ministry. But we don't see Joseph then. We don't see Joseph between 30 when Jesus sort of appears his ministry and 33 when Jesus dies on the cross. We just see Mary by herself as a widow. To the point where even when Jesus is dying on the cross, he says to one of his disciples, he says, you will now take care of Mary. This is your son and this is your mother. And binds them together as family. I can't help but wonder, when did Joseph die? Scholars speculate that Joseph must have died somewhere in Jesus' teenage years or in his 20s. Imagine that was so hard for Mary. God, you called me to raise the Christ child with Joseph, and now I've got to do it as a single mom. I've got to do this alone. Now I've got to suffer in this way and watch our son die, and you're not here with me anymore? Imagine the grief that Mary must have felt. That God called her to this thing and then took her partner away in it. And then takes her son away before she even passes. But I can't help but wonder, at what point did Joseph look at little baby Jesus or teenage Jesus and say, boy, when I heard that you were coming, I was really fearful. I was anxious, and quite frankly, I was sad, and I was depressed, and this was not how I had hoped for my life to be, and it took me a little while to accept this new plan that God had. But now when I look at you, you're just an unexpected gift. At one point, you were an unexpected problem or inconvenience or roadblock or recalibrating or readjustment. At one point, you instilled fear in me because I didn't know if I should take your mother as my wife, but now I look at you and you're a gift. Now I look at you and I see why God put you in my life. I'm glad that God called me to it, and I would have never changed anything in the world. I wonder at what point Joseph reached that place. You know, for all of us, I think we wrestle with that, don't we? There are some things that we can look back at in our life and say, oh, I now see what God allowed here, and I see how it's been used for good, and I see how this makes sense, and I see now how this is a gift. But reality is there are many things in our life we look back on and we don't understand. Reality is there's a lot of things we look back on our lives on, and we don't have the answer to why and how this happened. Reality is that Mary and Joseph, I'm sure, died and left this earth and still had questions of why. Why did he have to die so young? Why did I have to witness his death? Why did my husband have to die young? Why did we have to travel and run from kings who were trying to kill him? Even as an infant, people were out to get him. Why was this so hard? Maybe in some ways, some of Mary's questions were never answered. Today, I celebrate a decade in paid ministry, and I was reflecting on that this last week. And I was thinking about some of the most painful moments that I've had in ministry. And the most painful moments in ministry for me have been when I have sat with parents who've lost a child, whether that was a miscarriage or adult children, and the grief that's there. and the why and the unknown. Sometimes I think it's reminiscent to talk about this beautiful Christmas time and the birth of this child without acknowledging the reality that many people it doesn't work as flawlessly as that. That some people, there's just a challenge and there's hurt and there's grief attached to that. And so I think it's important we name that during this Christmas time. Because afresh, I sat this week with 2 different mothers who miscarried and just asked me why. Why? This wasn't the plan. And you sit with them in the midst of the grief, and there is no answer. And I know that's a heavy topic for the end of New Year's Eve. But I want to face the reality, and I don't want to sugarcoat anything, that for some of us, 2017 was hard. For some of us, the last decade was hard. For some of us, the last 20, 30 years, there's been some tough stuff, and we're still holding on to it, and it's not easy. And some of us, we can't just let it go. Some of us, we like Mary and Joseph, are looking back at our lives, and we're asking and trying to make sense. God, why have you allowed certain things to happen in my life? Why have certain things played out this way? And some of it, we've been able to make sense of it. Some of it, we've been able to look back at, like Mary and Joseph, and be able to say, wow, this was beautiful. I'm beginning to see God's plan in some things. And there are other things we look back on, and we just go, God, I just don't understand. But I trust you. But I trust you. So as we bring a close to this morning's message, I want to urge us to do something. It can be really hard to trust God when we don't have the answers to why things didn't plan out the way we wanted. But I find that for me, the way that I reground myself, which is a series we're getting ready to enter into in the middle of January, the importance of grounding ourselves in the midst of a chaotic world. The way that I ground myself is I take time to reflect on the ways in which God has been faithful to me. And so I'm going to invite you to do that in just a few moments. We're going to take some silence. I'm also quite amazed at how quiet the children have been. So maybe they're listening. And in the midst of the silence, I want us to really consider something. As you look over your life, or maybe just that 2017, what were some unexpected turns in your life? What were some things you had planned for? And then I want you to think about, and how has God used those things for good? How has what an unexpected turn in your life turned into an unexpected gift? Think about the ways in which, at the moment you were struck with fear like Joseph, at the moment you were struck with grief, but then what was that moment when all of a sudden you looked at that situation and you went, makes a little more sense now. And at the same time, don't have to let go of those things that don't make sense. You don't have to suppress or forget, but hold them up and say, God, there are things I know and I don't know. There are things I can make sense of and things that I can't. And in the midst of all of it, I'm going to trust you. For faith is trusting in the things you cannot see and do not understand. And so I invite us now in this space to just take a few moments and to close our eyes. And we're going to breathe deeply and then consider what were the things in 2017 over our lives that were the unexpected turns that we now can see as unexpected gifts, that they may remind us of God's faithfulness and that God is trustworthy. Will you breathe in with me now? And breathe out. Breathe in with me now. And breathe out. Breathe in one more time. And breathe out. And now may we sit in silence for a moment and consider the ways in which God has been faithful. Through many days dangers, toils, and snares. I have already come. 'Tis grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace that lead me home. Praise God, 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 praise God. Amen. As we continue in our worship, there are many things, I'm sure, that have been brought to the surface and in our minds and our hearts. And so we want to take those to God in prayer, and at the same time continue to remember those in our church who are not with us, who are at home recovering or in the hospitals. And so may we, as we come to this time of worship and leave this place today, remember Bill Bluter, who is at Lutheran Home, Susan Landis Linville, who is recovering at home, as well as Mike Schauer, who is recovering at home this week. And in our bulletin, you'll see on the back, there are several others in our church that we want to continue to remember in prayer. And my heart is reminded every time I walk outside of this cold weather, and every time I take refuge inside, I'm reminded of the blessing I have to have a warm space to go to. And there are many in our country and in our world and even in our town that don't have that luxury. And so for those around the world who are struggling with this winter weather, and those who've even passed in the last couple of weeks, we want to remember those family members and those who are struggling, and as well as be grateful that we have a church that on Tuesdays we open the doors here for people to come and have a warm space, and we want to remember them in prayer that they would continue to have that space here because of our faithful giving. So let's go to God in prayer now. God, we thank you for the ways in which you've been faithful to us. And God, we thank you that in the midst of challenging times, you provide your presence. We don't always have answers, and our emotions don't always change. But we know that you did not just suffer for us, but you suffered with us. And so we thank you that you know our suffering well. And we ask now that those in our church who are ill, that you would make them well. We ask that you would give us the promptings of your Spirit, that we may be the hands and feet of Christ, to be about the answers to those prayers of those in the world who are in need. And we do this now by praying the prayer that you taught us to pray. Our Father and Mother, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who have trespassed against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. And as we do the benediction, I want us to be mindful of the group that's going on a mission trip this week. We did a blessing for them a few weeks ago, but we also just want to continue to remember them as they journey. And so may, as you go and as they go, may we be people of light and of hope. May we be people who are the hands and feet of Christ. May we be people who, when the unexpected comes at us, we ground ourselves in knowing that we have a trustworthy God, one who takes the unexpected and turns it into unexpected gifts. Go in peace and know the Lord.